The Holodomor, also known as Stalin's terror famine, occurred in Soviet Ukraine during the 1930s. Although the exact extent of the tragedy remains unknown, a joint statement from the United Nations in 2003 estimated that between 7 and 10 million Ukrainians perished due to intentional starvation inflicted upon farmers, agricultural laborers, and their families. Some estimates suggest even higher numbers, reaching up to 12 million, while others are more conservative, indicating around 3.5 million deaths. Regardless, what remains indisputable is that it was a purposeful campaign of murder through the systematic denial of food to an entire nation, primarily targeting its agrarian way of life. The term, Holodomor, stems from the Ukrainian words for hunger and extermination. The recognition of this genocide was severely suppressed by the Soviet Union, with denial being prevalent even as late as the 1980s. However, as the Soviet Union neared its end, discussions about the true events began to surface. Fueled by the accounts of survivors who managed to escape the Holodomor and shared their harrowing stories. To comprehend why the Holodomor occurred, one must delve into the situation of the Soviet Union in the 1930s. During that time, Stalin had a grand vision of bringing the predominantly peasant and agrarian population into the modern era, even if it meant significant upheaval. The ambitious five-year plan aimed to industrialize the country, and to achieve this, numerous former farm workers, approximately 8 million, were compelled to join the burgeoning factories. As cities expanded, villages dwindled, and the idea of a successful communist revolution necessitating a substantial working class led to doubts about Russia being the ideal setting for such an upheaval. Other countries like Germany or Great Britain were deemed more likely candidates due to their stronger working classes. In an effort to adhere to Marxist ideologies and compete with Western rivals, Stalin was determined to transform the Soviet Union, heavily focusing on the development of the working class. As part of this transformation, individual farming practices were abolished, and food production was centralized under state control through collectivization. State farms were established using confiscated land, with peasants drafted as day laborers. Those who resisted handing over their land were exiled to remote prison camps, often located in Siberia. The primary focus of Stalin's efforts was the kulak class, comprising wealthy or productive farmers. Several campaigns were launched against them, seeking to dehumanize and marginalize this group. Consequently, agricultural productivity declined between 1931 and 1932, resulting in a harvest that fell short by approximately 3 million tons, a staggering 60% below the production target. As a consequence, food rationing was implemented, and while urban areas experienced hardships, the Ukrainian and Kazakh populations suffered the most. The state seized grain and rationed it based on need, prioritizing city workers over farmers. Some farms were even blacklisted and denied any food whatsoever, worsening the situation and leading to malnutrition on a large scale. Stalin and other high-ranking party members made their intentions clear. They sought the elimination of the kulak class and other perceived undesirable elements among the Ukrainian population. The famine provided a convenient cover for their plan. Suspicion and distrust spread, with questions arising about whether the kulaks were hoarding grain to punish the Soviet Union for seizing their land. In response, Stalin intensified his actions, sending secret police to deal with the deteriorating situation. All food was confiscated, and intellectuals critical of the state and party were arrested and executed. Ukrainian language books were removed from schools and libraries, further suppressing the local culture. A chilling figure of 10,000 executions per week was reported, establishing Ukraine as a de facto nationwide prison camp. In their desperation, the Ukrainian people turned to unconventional food sources, resorting to eating tree bark, earthworms, frogs, roots, and even old leather boots. In dire circumstances, they were forced to extract and consume grain from horse manure. Hoarding or hiding food resulted in severe consequences, with no mercy shown to those who resisted. Robbery, sexual assault, and executions were common punishments. Even windows, doors, chairs, and tables were taken, stripping the region of everything of value, leaving only the starving population, perceived as having little to no worth in the new Soviet Union. Desperation set in, leading neighbors to turn on each other as they adjusted to their grim reality. People resorted to hiding chickens in their homes to evade the marauding brigades and concealed grain in their shoes or stole from their neighbors. Each day became a struggle for survival, as once honest and proud individuals did whatever they could to stay alive. Heart-wrenching accounts emerged of children smothered to silence their cries of hunger or hanged for stealing bread. Some tried to seek food in larger cities, resulting in train stations filled with peasants, pleading for sustenance while clutching their emaciated children. The cities, protected by rationing, experienced lesser effects of the famine, but the offerings were never enough to alleviate the growing desperation. As the situation worsened, cannibalism became a grim reality for many. Parents were faced with the unthinkable choice of watching their children starve to death or feeding one sibling to the other. Over 2,500 people were convicted of murder and cannibalism during this harrowing time. The Holodomor stands apart from other famines throughout history, as it was a calculated response by Stalin to transform the Soviet Union. The deaths of millions were deemed a small price to pay to implement state-run farms and eradicate the independent Kulak way of life. Stalin and other party officials were willing to sacrifice large segments of the population to create a more industrialized nation with a thriving working class. As Ukrainian laborers perished, food production further declined, and Russian laborers were brought in as replacements. To truly understand the Holodomor, it is essential to engage with reliable sources and read books like Red Famine by Anne Applebaum and Stalin's Peasants by Sheila Fitzpatrick. One should form their own opinion on whether this was a deliberate attempt to eradicate Ukraine or merely a reflection of Stalin's callous disregard for human life. Regardless, the Holodomor will forever remain one of history's most appalling famines, a tragedy that should never be forgotten.